Hello and welcome everyone to this another exciting episode on Anubhav Learning Series with anubhavtrainings.com. Our today's topic is what is promises in JavaScript and how to use the concept of promise, which is a JavaScript concept in SAP UI5 programming. So let's understand what promises are and why do we use them and how to apply the promise. So let me explain about introduction of promise. So the very first thing you need to understand that JavaScript is an asynchronous programming language. If you've not seen my video on JavaScript asynchronous non-blocking IO, I would put the link into the description of this video. Kindly go back and check that, how typically JavaScript works. So JavaScript is an asynchronous programming language, which means certain actions, operations, and methods which we call, they would not give you the response immediately. You would probably need to attach to something called a promise or a callback function to be able to respond to the response which it comes back from a method call. Take an example where you're calling a service. Now, when you call a service from the web browser, the response of that service, you never know how much time it may take. It may take about a second, half a second, 5 microsecond, 10 microsecond. It is not fixed. So to be able to handle the response of such calls, of a method call, service call, we rely on two concepts. The first concept is called callbacks and second is called promise. Now, the concept of callback we have already seen as part of our UI5 training, so you are well versed with. This video focus more on the promise side. What is promise and how to use it? Now, a promise is basically introduced with ES6 version of JavaScript, and it's mainly to used for reducing the callback hells. So what you typically do, you call a method. So let's say call1, and this method gives you a response. Now this response, after this response comes, you call another method inside, and that method will give you another response. And for that method call2, you have further response callback. Yeah. So like this, if you see, you will have function inside function. It becomes a mash of functions over a period of time. This is what we call it as a callback hell. To avoid this callback hell, we use concept of promises. So what is a promise? By definition, if somebody asks you in interview, a promise is a action which guarantees a result in future. The result could be expected, expected one, which is called positive results. Let's call this as then. A positive result, I'm naming it as a then, okay? And it could be if anything goes wrong, the result will be something which is not anticipated, or it's a negative result. We call it as catch. So remember this word positive result and negative result, then and catch. Now, when we defining the promise, we have to actually go back and write these conditions, or these positive result expected processing and negative result expected processing. We would have to do that. Now, what does a promise include? A promise includes a callback, two callbacks, one for positive results and another for negative results. Now, if you also see, we started with the definition that it's an action. So of course, you also need an action in the promise. So we need to define the action, and we need to also invoke the action. When you invoke the action, that is the time you will attach your callbacks with this action. This action is also known as executor. When you're executing the actions, and then later on you define this action, this is where you return a promise out. Looks confused? No, don't worry. Let's understand with a practical example. So let me switch it over to presentation mode to explain you one practical example. So meet Alex. Alex is a small boy. He's going in school. He loves to play football. Once upon a time, Alex goes to his mom and says, "Mom, can I promise you something? I would like to promise to clean my room." What mom says to Alex? Says, "Fine. If you clean your room, I will allow you to go to football. Else, you have to go for laundry." So what Alex does? Alex is going to go and start cleaning. Now the cleaning is a process which is an asynchronous one. Mom is not going to sit there and see Alex cleaning the room. Mom will go back to kitchen on her work. At the same time, Alex will go back to his room and start cleaning. So the word cleaning or the cleaning the room is an activity which is your action. Now that action is happening asynchronously. Once that action is complete, Alex will call the mom. Mom will come back and say, "Okay, did you really clean your room? Is the promise fulfilled?" If yes, then you can go for playing the football. If the promise is not fulfilled, you have to go for laundry. So that's the entire process of promise. And promise in JavaScript exactly follows the same thing. So if you compare exactly same thing here with this practical example, what you would observe that mom is the caller. She is calling Alex, and Alex is doing an activity which is nothing but cleaning room. So Alex is making a promise to clean a room. This is our executor. When executor is executed, you will know that possibly there are two outcomes of this execution of executor, either a positive output or a negative output. If the output is positive, then you have a callback which is called then, which is playing football. If it's a negative output, then you also have a callback, which we call it as catch. So while you're defining and working with promises in JavaScript, you have to define this executor. You have to define the positive outcome. You have to define the negative outcome. You can think of in programming world a negative outcome as an exception, right? So let's go into the system and we will try to create a very simple example with promise implementing the same real-time scenario which we discussed here and understand in JavaScript programming world how this can be realized. So I will switch it over to Web IDE to showcase you implementing a simple example. Please note that we will also have one more video on the same topic where I will also show you implementing promise with a real-time UI5 application. This video, we will focus only understanding the concept of the promise. So now I am with SAP Web IDE and let me quickly create a new folder over here. We can call this project as promise. And now I will just add an index.html file. Line by line, step by step, no copy paste of code. Let's create an HTML document with a header and a body. In the header, I will create a script tag. And of course, in the body, I will also create one to be able to trigger that immediately. At the same time now, I'll just say welcome to Anubhav Trainings. Just save and run this HTML file quickly. Just execute and now you can get your result, which is good, which is fine. Just wanted to check the basic plain flow. Now let's go back to Web IDE and we will implement things step by step. So as the step one, we need to now define our executor. So step one, define executor, which is what going to return a promise later on. And our executor here is room cleaning. Did you clean the room, or say room cleaning? Now to this room cleaning, I will pass true or false. All right. Now maybe is the room cleaned or not clean? I can just pass an argument true or false. Yeah. Now what will I get in return is a positive callback and a negative callback. So then and catch. If you remember, it has two outcomes. Now just to also comment out a piece of code here, that's my step number 2, where we define positive result from promise, and also in my step 3, the negative result from promise. Let's put that in step 3. Now, when it is a positive result from promise, I have a callback function, which can also receive an argument, let's say something like maybe just some result. And I can just say write document, and I'll say, yay, I can go for football. At the same time, I would like to also print the value of this result, which the promise will give me back. Please note, this is an asynchronous function. It will be called when the promise is fulfilled, which is positive result. At the same time, just in case when you're doing room cleaning, something can go wrong, or Alex get asleep and Alex will not able to complete the room cleaning. In that case, it will hit our negative result callback, which is catch. Also, you can have an error over here, or you can have some message, error message, for example, in real world, and I can say document.write, and I say, oops, I have to go for laundry. And I will also print together the result, or the so-called message. Sorry, I just have to concatenate that here. Yeah. So that's our step 1, step 2, step 3. Now, as I mentioned, that this room cleaning is a promise. So we have to define this promise. Either you can do in header, or you can do it just above the caller. So maybe just to keep it separate, I'll do it in a separate script tag. So now what I'll do is I will define this as step 4. And this is where my promise comes into play. So we will say var a global function room cleaning is equals to function value. So this value is what I will pass from here. Yeah, I will pass some value from here. So I'll say pass value, and now I will return a promise, new promise. So here this promise is a keyword. It's a built-in JavaScript object, which is part of JavaScript. Just like in ABAP, you have side datum, side uname. You don't need to define them. Similarly, here this promise, you don't need to define. It's a built-in JavaScript object, just like date object in JavaScript. So we return a promise out, which has an execution of a function, and this function receives a value, and in this value, I can just evaluate what's happening. So you can see when I'm calling room cleaning, I'm going to pass this value. What I just do in this promise, I check if the value is true, then I'm going to respond positively. else I'm going to respond negatively. So in spite of writing this processing logic within the same place, which could have made your callback as very complicated, you write this separately in a different stub. This could be a different file with powered by scaffolding template, or it could be in another JavaScript file altogether. We will see the practical use case of promise in our very next episode. If you have not subscribed this YouTube channel at this point of time, please hit the subscribe button and the bell icon so that you get notified when I release the next video with the practical use case of UI5 using promises. Now I come back here, respond positively. So as a response of this, I will call resolve. This is again the way to resolve the promise, which gives a positive response. If I'm not happy, then I can say reject. This is the way you can use these built-in functions within the promise to send a positive response or a negative response. If this gets executed, of course, it is going to call my then callback function, which is for positive response. If reject is getting executed within the promise, then the promise is going to respond back to this error callback, which is written here. At the same time, we have an opportunity to return something out as well, one argument at the moment. So I will return that one argument, hey, you are dude, Alex. Sorry, you lost it. Yeah. So watch out when the callbacks are triggered. This is the argument which will be received also by your callbacks, and it will also be printed together with the existing statements. All right, it's time that we test this. Of course, it's time that we test it with different values passing to the room cleaning. Suppose Alex clean the room. Alex pass it true. I'm going to run that, watching out. I just come back and keep my window next to the code, so we can always keep left and right all our code so that we can just right away test these things. So now what I'll do is I'll go on the right side and just refresh. And you can see, oops, I have to cross check what's happening. So you can see promise is called, but since even I sent true, it's not considering that. So am I making a mistake here while calling the room cleaning? Yes, exactly. So the request and resolve are default argument of any promise. So this promise, when I'm defining this request, reject and resolve, they are the arguments. So I have to go back, and this value argument, I should put it only to my executor, but this resolve and reject has to be kept as an argument in the promise. So just do that. This is the way you have to write promises, resolve and reject. These are default argument to the function of promise. Let's come back and test again. So I'm passing true now, which is then going to go inside. It's going to evaluate this condition. The value is received here, and this value will now call the resolve. As a resolve is called, the system is going to call back this then function, and in then function, it's going to call my document execute. So let's refresh. Yay! I can go for football. You are dude Alex. You can see from here, we are also sending a message back to the caller, to the callback function, success callback function. That message is also received and printed on the UI. As the next step, I'm going to go back and say false. And I can come back and refresh. Oops, I have to go for laundry. Sorry, you lost the chance. So that's exactly how you divide and segregate your functionality and modularize your code, handling the asynchronous code handling using promises in JavaScript. Now, you can think right now it's more of a very hard-coded example where we're just passing this input. Imagine I don't pass an input, but here you are calling a service. So for example, if you're calling a service, an ordered a service for an example, or making an AJAX call, when the response of AJAX call comes back, you are going to be, depending on the response type and response code, you are going to call back either the success or the failure. As an advantage of that, this function, this piece of function, this piece of promise is becoming reusable so that you can anytime use this room cleaning function again and again rather than making an ajax call again and again. And if tomorrow there is a change, you would end up changing all the places. You can just make change at one place. So all the asynchronous handling can be done effectively with the help of promise to avoid the callback hells. We are going to see this example in our very next session. If you would like to also download the complete source code in this presentation, I would request you to please check the description of the video to be able to see. So with that, I hope you enjoyed the concept of promise, and you'll also be able to explain it in the interview with a practical example and as well implement yourself in the system. With that, thank you so much for watching this video, and I will see you in the next session.